It's time now for some political analysis. Amy Walter is the national editor of the Cook Political Report. Antjuan Seawright is a Democratic strategist and contributor on our digital network, CBSN. And Leslie Sanchez is a CBS News political contributor and also a familiar face on CBSN. Good to have you all here. Amy, I want to start with you. You heard Anthony lay out the Battleground Tracker and some of the nuggets he picked up. And it reminds me of the way you framed it. Revolution versus restoration. Right. It seems among the Democrats, the fight to be had is on the revolution part of the ticket.
Right, and that's where the Warren and the Sanders fight is right now. They're taking about a third of the vote. But we were talking right before the panel, the person then, we wonder then, who will Biden ultimately have to fight with for that restoration? And we haven't seen that quite yet. Even Pete Buttigieg, I think, is on the sort of Warren and the Sanders part of that, again, saying we need somebody different. We need a new way of thinking about things. We don't need to go back to the old ways. He says that a lot, right? Mm-hmm. Let's not go back to the 90s. We need to be looking to the future, not such veiled swipe at a candidate who was very active in the 90s. The person who really is, I think, a threat to then Joe Biden is somebody like Kamala Harris, where you see that she doesn't pop up really very much in the polling. Her numbers overall are pretty low. But when you ask people about their second choice, her name comes up very high in that list. I think she's at 45% in your poll, which suggests that people don't necessarily, they're not thinking a whole lot about her. They don't know a whole lot about her quite yet, but they have her in the back of their mind of sort of if not Joe Biden, maybe I'll take a look at her.
Maybe they'll give her a shot. Well, she is someone that, in that interview with Pete Buttigieg, he did also take a little bit of a gentle swipe, Antjuan will say, in terms of trying to differentiate how he would respond to potentially prosecuting the existing president. Are we going to see these elbows get a little sharper next week on the debate stage, or are we still going to have these just sort of veiled swipes?
Well, politics is a contact sport, and so you just have to assume for people who want to separate themselves from their opponents, they're going to do everything they can to...
They've been pretty gentle so far.
It's still early. We're not even in preseason yet. We're still in the training camp phase of this process. It's still early. Of course, there's going to be a strong attempt to define their opponents, but also to swipe at the front runner, Joe Biden. We've seen some of that to this point. I think it's actually backfired. I think it's made him stronger. But to Pete's point, he is trying to climb the ladder or get into the space that you talked about where he is well positioned to be an alternative to Joe Biden. But the candidate who has the ability to take a licking and keep on ticking will ultimately be the one that I think will be able to take on Donald Trump. And to this point, the polls indicate that person is Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm. And so when we see that debate stage, it's not going to be ganging up on Joe Biden. That's not going to be a successful strategy.
I think I will not. I do not think it will be. I think that what the voters are hungry and thirsty for is what people are for, laying out your own policy agenda. We've heard that time and time again. And I think that if I was on that stage, I would strictly talk about what I was for, but I would speak to quality of life issues because I think that's where everyone is. Everybody wants to feel secured. They want to feel like their America is better than their parents' and grandparents' generation.
Leslie, there was a lot of attention this week to internal polling or other polling that might suggest President Trump is more vulnerable, particularly in the heartland, than he would allow others to believe.
Sure.
Where are these sort of soft spots for him?
Right. I think it's a really fair question when you're talking about incumbency, but I also like to look at the historical context, right? We know for the most part people prefer to give a president 2 terms, unless there's something wildly different about it. Just historically, you're going to do that. What's different about Trump is if we even compare, I would tell my Democratic colleagues, to Obama at this point in his administration, 2011, 2012, they're within 3 or 4 points of each other in terms of approval rating. He also had just had a big defeat in the midterms, speaking of Obama, and same kind of, bruised egos in that sense. But by the time he got to Election Day, there was a resounding defeat. And that's part of what Republicans are looking at. The president has mostly flatlined when it comes to approval rating. But what I'm not hearing talked about is style of leadership. That's what Republicans learned in the primary last go around. It was not an issue mano a mano on policy. It was this this new approach, a new, more centrist approach that wasn't particularly Republican. It certainly wasn't conservative, but it was breaking the polarization. Well, it's emboldened polarization, but it was breaking traditional Washington. And that's what you're going to need in contrast to this president if any Democrat is going to get leeway.
And is Biden the biggest threat still to him? I mean, that's certainly from our polling what people's impression is, that he is the best shot.
I think for most part you could say that because he's going to appeal to a lot of that Rust Belt voter, the working labor, a lot of areas that Trump did well in that other Republicans have not done particularly well in and not consistently. But again, I'm going to go back to the economy. If you look at the economic numbers in those states, which is what we looked at in the midterms as well, if it's over 50%, then it's likely to swing toward Republicans. And that's what I'm going to be watching.
But I think.
But
It's been pretty obvious that healthcare is the #1 issue of the day for Democrats and Republicans. And to your point, here's the interesting thing about Joe Biden. He is one of very few people running our primary that could bring the many corners of our party together and take away from the Trump voter who voted for him in 2016, who voted for Barack Obama in 2008. And if healthcare is the #1 issue of the day, the Republicans have failed the American people as it relates to access and affordability.
There was one really important thing, though, in that the pushback from the Trump campaign on the polling. They said, well, in our own polling, when we gave voters a choice of a candidate who had these certain qualities, then the numbers got much tighter. This is called an informed ballot. Basically, what they were saying is, if you had a choice between Donald Trump and a socialist, who would you vote for, right? There's a reason that the term socialist is coming up a lot, not just from the Trump campaign,
You're
but everywhere
teeing me
else.
up perfectly here, Amy, because I want to play this soundbite here from Senator Bernie Sanders.
I do understand that I and other progressives will face massive attacks from those who attempt to use the word socialism as a slur. But I should also tell you that I have faced and overcome these attacks for decades, and I am not the only one.
Yeah. Well, what the poll showed is that that's not working really well right now, because when you ask Democratic voters who they think is the most electable, who's a candidate who's best able to beat Donald Trump, this is where Joe Biden wins, in part because it's harder to attack him with those qualities. So it's pretty clear what the Trump campaign wants to do. Look, they're not going to win because Trump's numbers are going to increase. No. Obama's numbers, as he ran through 2012, his approval ratings went up. That's not what's going to happen here. His numbers are going to probably stay the same, Trump's are, but he has to make whoever the Democrat is as unpopular as he is. And if you look, there's a new NBC Wall Street Journal poll, the candidates who they said, who are you the most uncomfortable with? Trump's #1 at 52%, Sanders #2 at 41%. That's the danger.
Well, on the historical part, you had more people, Trump get more support in terms of the primaries than ever before. He also had more people voting against him in the primaries than ever before. So it was the dichotomy of the two, which again goes to that point of what were they looking for with Trump if you look at the voters? Authenticity. They were tired of this polished, as people in the business, who do a lot of the messaging and preparing candidates, voters were tired of the veneer around politicians. They wanted somebody who was non-traditional in that sense, who had conviction, whether you like it or not. And the funny part about the president is they said, oh, he'll be more presidential when he gets into the White House. When I get there, I'm going to be more presidential. And it's like wearing a pair of shoes that are too tight. You may get down the hall, but the second you can, you're going to take them off. And that's what he's done. And people have respected, they may not like his style, but they respect what he's done. And now he gets legitimate credit for a booming economy. That is a really difficult thing to move against as an.
Well, we've got to leave it there, unfortunately. It's all the time we have. Right. But we have more than 500 days to go. I'm sure we'll be bringing you back to talk more. So thanks to all of you on our panel, and we will see you Friday night when our digital network CBSN airs a special 2-hour edition of Red and Blue live from Columbia, South Carolina, where 22 Democratic presidential candidates will be appearing at one of the biggest events in the primary season, Congressman Jim Clyburn's annual Fish Fry. We'll be back in a moment.